I'm an old man now. My hands shake sometimes when I try to light my pipe. My back aches with the memory of long nights spent walking the dusty roads of Van Meter. But my mind is clear. I remember the autumn of 1903. The harvest was good that year, the cornfields rustling gold under a wide, blue Iowa sky. Life was simple, predictable. Then the whispers started. Old man Griffith, the merchant, swore he'd seen a light, bright as a welding arc, shining from the head of something with wings, huge and leathery, leaping rooftops. We dismissed it, of course. A bad dream, too much rye whiskey, until it came back. And then, it wasn't just old man Griffith seeing things in the dark. Van Meter, that year, was a town that knew itself. Every brick on Main Street, every crack in the dusty road was familiar. We were a farming community, small and self-sufficient, tucked into the rolling plains. The air smelled of drying corn and damp earth, wood smoke curling from chimneys in the evenings. It was a good smell, a comforting one, the smell of hearth and home. I was a deputy constable then, in my late 40s. My face was already weathered by the sun and the wind. Lines of concern etched around my steady hazel eyes. My dark hair was starting to thin at the temples, but my shoulders were broad, my hands calloused from work. I moved with a deliberate gait, no haste. Even when a call came in, people trusted me. They trusted me with their laws, and with the quieter worries that didn't always make it into the official reports. I believed in order, in rational explanations. Most things you could figure out if you just looked hard enough. But some things just wouldn't fit. Main Street was the heart of it all, lined with brick and wooden storefronts. There was O.V. White's dry goods store, always bustling, smelling of bolts of cloth and fresh coffee. O.V. was a prominent man, in his early 50s, prosperous. He carried himself with a certain self-assurance, his round face usually flushed with good humor, a neatly trimmed mustache, sensible suits, a gold watch chain across his stomach. He was a man of action, quick to laugh, quick to offer advice, always certain he could solve a problem. He was the kind of man who believed a clear head and a loaded rifle could handle anything. Across the street, you might see Elara Finch, a retired schoolmistress in her late 60s. Her hair, once red, was now a wispy white bun, stray strands always escaping around her kind, intelligent face. Spectacles perched on her nose, simple, practical dresses. She lived on the edge of town, surrounded by books, quiet and observant. She knew more about the old stories, the local folklore, the forgotten history of this land than anyone I ever met. Most folks considered them quaint superstitions. I just figured she had a good memory for things other people forgot. And then there was young Joshua Reed, my new deputy, 22 years old, tall and gangly, still growing into his frame. His earnest blue eyes held a mix of ambition and a nervous excitement, especially when he was wearing that new uniform, which still seemed a little too big for him. He hailed from a farm outside town, sending what little pay he earned back to his family. He'd stutter a bit when he was flustered, but he wanted to prove himself. You could tell. He was the untested innocence of Van Meter, full of hope, believing that every problem had a solution. He hadn't seen enough of the world yet to know otherwise. That autumn, the world started to show him otherwise. It began, as these things often do, with something small, easily dismissed. Old man U.G. Griffith, the merchant I mentioned, came into my office on September 29th, looking like he'd seen a ghost. His hands were shaking so bad, he spilled his coffee all over my desk. He swore he'd been woken in the dead of night by a light, a brilliant, blinding shaft of it, cutting through his bedroom window. He said it was coming from the head of something with huge, leathery wings, like a bat, but big as a wagon. He swore he saw its silhouette launch from his roof, then leap from rooftop to rooftop across Main Street, its horn light sweeping through the absolute darkness like a hellish searchlight. He said it moved too fast, too quiet for anything natural, and he smelled it. A smell like rotten eggs mixed with something metallic and foul. I tried to calm him, of course. Told him it was a bad dream, the moon playing tricks. Maybe a little too much of Mrs. Henderson's spiced cider. He was an old man, prone to exaggeration. The town chuckled about it for a day or two. Old Griffith saw a demon, they'd joke in the saloon. We all believed in what we could see, what we could touch. We believed in the harvest, in the integrity of a good fence, in the common sense of our neighbors. A winged creature with a glowing horn? That was for fairy tales, not Van Meter, Iowa in 1903. But then, the very next night, the whispers came again, and this time, they weren't so easy to dismiss. Dr. Miller, a man of science, of medicine, steady as a rock, came to me, his face pale, almost ashen. He'd been woken by his dogs barking, a frantic, unnatural sound. He described a light, not like any lantern or lightning, but a pulsing, living light that shone from the forehead of a monstrous, winged creature. It was perched on the roof of his house, he said, its massive, bat-like wings folded back, casting a huge shadow in the moonlight. He said it was easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, he told me, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air, and the smell, that pervasive stench of sulfur and decay. He swore to me, his voice trembling, that he had seen it with his own 2 eyes. I was still trying to process that when Mr. Higgins, the bank cashier, a meticulous, cautious man who never exaggerated anything, came rushing in. He was almost incoherent. He'd been walking home from the bank, locking up for the night, when the thing swooped down from the darkness, right over Main Street. He described the same impossible details, the enormous bat-like wings, beating the air with a sound like canvas ripping, the 7-foot height, the horn on its forehead, emitting a blinding beam of light that swept across the storefronts. He said its eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on him. And the smell? He insisted. That foul, metallic, sulfurous stench, thick and cloying, clung to his clothes even after he'd run home and locked his doors. 2 separate sightings, 2 reliable men, 2 identical stories. The descriptions were too precise, too consistent to be coincidence or drunken ramblings. The bat-like wings, the luminous horn, the blinding light, the impossible height, the pervasive, stomach-turning smell of sulfur. It wasn't just Old Man Griffith's bad dream anymore. It was Dr. Miller's waking nightmare. It was Mr. Higgins' terror on Main Street. The easygoing atmosphere of Van Meter began to curdle. The industrious calm gave way to an unsettling dread. The comforting sounds of crickets and distant farm animals were replaced by an unnatural, heavy silence, broken only by the frantic barking of dogs or the occasional panicked shout. The crisp autumn air now seemed to carry a metallic tang, and then that unmistakable, stomach-turning stench. It lingered in the air, permeated homes, clung to clothing. Lamplight, which had always been a beacon of warmth, became a desperate defense against the encroaching darkness. The wind rustled through the dry cornfields with an almost watchful quality, and shadows stretched long and hungry down the dusty roads. The world, which had felt so wide and open in Iowa, began to shrink. First, to the few blocks of Main Street, then to the interiors of locked homes. A palpable sense of something deeply wrong settled over Van Meter, a quiet, collective dread that would only deepen with the coming nights. We were not just scared, we were beginning to understand that we were not alone. The third night descended upon Van Meter like a shroud. It wasn't just dark, it was a hungry, oppressive blackness that seemed to swallow the gaslight from the street lamps and the faint glow from our windows. The easy chatter that usually filled the autumn evenings was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. Businesses along Main Street closed their doors before dusk, their owners hurrying home, not bothering to light their storefronts. Families huddled indoors, curtains drawn tight, lamps burning low, as if brightness might draw attention. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of the wind through the drying cornfields became a source of sudden terror. I walked the streets with Joshua, my shotgun feeling heavier than usual in my hands. O.V. White, still determined, still clinging to his belief in action, patrolled a few blocks away with a group of other armed men. He carried his Winchester 94, his usual confident stride replaced by a measured, almost hesitant gait. The air itself felt thick, not just with the chill of late September, but with an unseen weight, a premonition, and always that smell, that pervasive, stomach-turning stench of sulfur and decay, like rotten eggs and something else, something metallic and foul, a smell that now seemed to cling to the very fabric of the town. It was in our clothes, in our homes, in the air we breathed. It was the creature's calling card, and it was everywhere. We walked slowly, Joshua's young face pale under the brim of his hat, his eyes darting into every shadow. He clutched his pistol, his knuckles white. "Deputy Thorne," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Do you think it knows we're here, watching?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the town was no longer ours. We were simply waiting, and it came. The silence broke, not with a roar, but with a low hum, a vibration that started in the earth itself and climbed into your teeth. Then, a light, not the steady, comforting glow of our lamps, nor the sharp, brief flash of lightning. This was a blinding white, pulsing, alive, sweeping down from the sky as if carried on an invisible hand. It bathed Main Street in an unnatural, hellish day, stark and unforgiving, turning familiar storefronts into ghostly caricatures. It swooped low, lower than it had before, right over the telegraph poles, its massive, leathery wings beating the air with a sound like canvas ripping, a sound that tore through the quiet night. It was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more, its form silhouetted against the pulsing light of its horn. That horn, a luminous beacon on its forehead, swept its blinding beam across the brick facades of the feed and grain, then the general store, then the bank, illuminating dozens of terrified faces pressed against windows, eyes wide with horror and disbelief. This wasn't a shadow or a fleeting glimpse. This was a brazen, terrifying appearance, in full view of every soul, brave or foolish enough to peer outside. Its unnatural speed, its impossible scale, its sheer audacity. There was no denying it now. No bad dreams, no rye whiskey, no tricks of the moon. This was real, and it was here. Then, from down the street, I heard it. A shout, raw and desperate, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle. 5 times. Asterisk. Crack, 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 crack. Asterisk. It was O.V. White. I started running, Joshua close behind me, our boots pounding on the dusty road. We reached the general store just as O.V. lowered his Winchester. He was standing in the middle of Main Street, bathed in the creature's sweeping light, his face ashen, his body trembling. The rifle seemed to weigh a ton in his hands, which were shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. The creature was directly above him, hovering for a moment, its colossal wings beating slowly, the sulphurous stench now overwhelming, choking the air. Its horn light, still pulsing, seemed to be fixed on O.V., almost in a mocking gaze. "I hit it," O.V. whispered, his voice hoarse, barely a breath. "I saw them. 5 shots, right in the chest." I looked up. The creature hung in the air, utterly unperturbed. There was no blood, no wound, not even a hesitation in its movements. Its leathery hide, glinting wetly in its own light, seemed to have swallowed the bullets without a trace, leaving no mark, no ripple. It simply hovered, its black, intelligent eyes fixed on O.V. White, on all of us, with an almost knowing, ancient malevolence. It wasn't just observing, it was times watching asterisk. And it was completely, horrifyingly invulnerable. The creature then tilted its massive head, as if in silent judgment, and with a single, powerful beat of its wings, it shot upward, vanishing into the night as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the lingering stench and the ringing silence. O.V. White stood there for a long moment, the rifle still in his hands, but his shoulders slumped, his confident posture gone. The light from a nearby gas lamp caught his face, and I saw something shatter in his eyes. The man who believed in a clear head and a loaded rifle, the man who was quick to laugh and quicker to act, was gone. In his place was a shell, staring into the dark, where an impossible beast had just absorbed his bullets as if they were pebbles. His defiance had been met not with a struggle, but with indifference. The horror of his powerlessness, the realization that his bullets were meaningless, was a wound that would never truly heal. He was broken. It didn't even flinch, Joshua stammered, his own pistol still clutched in his hand, his eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen in him before. No, I said, my voice flat. It didn't. The conventional wisdom, the logic that guided our lives, had just been torn to shreds. We were not dealing with an animal, not with a criminal, not with anything that could be reasoned with or stopped with lead and gunpowder. This thing was something else, something intelligent, something ancient, and it had made its invulnerability chillingly, undeniably clear. Maintaining order in the face of this kind of chaos was a losing battle. My job was to enforce the law, to protect the peace. But how do you protect people from something that defies all laws of nature, something that laughs at bullets? The town was no longer just scared. It was under siege. Its every resident a prisoner in their own home, waiting for the horn's gaze to sweep over their windows again. I spent the rest of the night walking, checking on the terrified families, trying to offer reassurances that felt hollow even to my own ears. O.V. White had retreated into his store, locking himself in, refusing to speak. The other men who had patrolled with him were scattered, their bravado evaporated. We were small. We were helpless. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, I knew I couldn't keep looking for answers in the bottom of a cartridge box. We needed a different kind of understanding. My thoughts turned to Alara Finch, the retired schoolmistress on the edge of town, with her quiet ways and her dusty books. Most people thought her knowledge of old stories and local folklore was just a quaint pastime. But if there was anything in this world that might shed light on something so utterly, profoundly times wrong, asterisk, it wouldn't be found in a sheriff's ledger or a doctor's bag. It would be found in the forgotten whispers of the land itself. I walked the familiar path to her small, neat house on the outskirts of town. The air was crisp, the sky a pale, hopeful blue, but the pervasive sulfur smell clung to everything. A foul memory of the night. Her garden, usually so vibrant, seemed muted, the autumn flowers drooping. I knocked on her door, the sound echoing in the unnatural quiet. She opened it almost immediately, as if she'd been expecting me. Her white hair, usually neatly pinned, had a few more stray strands escaping. Her spectacles were perched on her nose, and she held a worn, leather-bound book in her hands. She didn't look startled, or even particularly fearful, just thoughtful. "Elias," she said, her voice soft but firm, the same voice that had taught generations of Van Meter children their letters. "Come in. I heard the shots last night, and I felt it. The town is afraid." Her small parlor was filled with books, stacked on shelves, spilling onto tables, some even on the floor. The scent of old paper and dried herbs replaced the sulfur for a moment. A welcome, if temporary, reprieve. She offered me a cup of tea, her hands steady as she poured. "Elara," I began, choosing my words carefully. "That thing, it's not an animal. O.V. White. He put 5 rounds into it. Didn't even leave a scratch." She nodded slowly, sipping her tea. "No," she confirmed. "It wouldn't. Not lead. Not iron. Not anything made by human hands." My blood ran cold. "You know what it is?" She looked at me, her kind, intelligent eyes holding a depth of knowledge that was both comforting and terrifying. The old ones, the earliest settlers, they had stories. Stories their grandmothers told them, passed down from the tribes that were here before any of us. Of creatures from the earth, from deep places, things that slept for ages, then stirred. They called them the Watchers from below. Watchers? Joshua had joined us, having followed me to Elara's, his face still etched with the events of the night. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his uniform looking even more ill-fitting. "What are they watching for?" Elara turned to him, a faint, almost sad smile touching her lips. "Perhaps for us. Perhaps for change. Perhaps for nothing at all, save the unfolding of time. But these tales, they spoke of 2, always 2, sometimes more, but never just one. And they spoke of their intelligence, not like an animal's cunning, but something ancient, profound, a knowledge of things we've forgotten or never knew." 2? I felt a fresh wave of dread. One impossible creature was enough. 2? "The horn," Elara continued, her gaze distant, looking past us, as if seeing into the past. "The light, it's not just for seeing, Elias. It's for communicating, for sensing, for compelling. The old stories say it can make men forget what they've seen or make them see things that aren't there. But it shows itself now. It wants to be seen. It wants to be known." "Why?" Joshua asked, his voice a tremor. "Why now?" Elara shook her head, a sigh escaping her lips. "The land shifts. The earth breathes. Perhaps something we have done, something we have built, has disturbed its sleep. Or perhaps its time simply came again. These things are patient. They have all the time in the world." She paused, her eyes finally settling on me. "The creatures, they often made their lairs in the earth, in caves, in hollow places, places where the air smells of sulfur, where the rocks have a strange, metallic sheen." My mind immediately went to the abandoned coal mine just outside of town, a dark, gaping maw in the earth that had been closed for years. The smell of sulfur was always strongest there, people said. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. "So, what do we do, Elara?" I asked, the weight of the town's fear settling heavy on my shoulders. "If bullets are useless, if it's intelligent, if it knows us, what then?" She looked at me, her expression grave. "You don't fight a force of nature, Elias. You survive it. You understand it, if you can. And then you remember it, so it doesn't happen again. Or, if it does, you know what you are truly up against." The world, which had already shrunk to the few blocks of Main Street and then to the interiors of locked homes, now seemed to shrink further, to a tiny, vulnerable point. We were no longer simply scared. We were besieged. We were being watched by something ancient and invulnerable, something that laughed at our bullets and our understanding. And a chilling, terrible thought began to settle in my mind. We were not hunting a monster. It was hunting us. The idea that times were being hunted, not the other way around, dug its claws into me deep. But what good was understanding if it led only to despair? Elara had given us a direction, if not a solution. The abandoned coal mine. It was a place everyone in Van Meter knew, a scar on the land, closed up years ago after the seams ran dry. A place of deep, hollow earth, where the air, even above ground, always carried a faint tang of something mineral, something dead. And the sulfur, yes, it was strongest there. I left Ilara's house with a grim resolve. There was no going back to normal. Not after what we'd seen, not after what we'd been told. We couldn't just wait for it to come back. We had to face it, or at least find it. By midday, the news had spread, quiet as smoke but just as pervasive. Ilara Finch had spoken, and I, Elias Thorne, was organizing a party to go to the mine. It wasn't an order I gave, not really, more like a challenge, a desperate, foolhardy challenge. But there were still men in Van Meter who believed in action, even when logic had abandoned them. O.V. White was one of them, though he was a changed man. His usual booming voice was a whisper, his face drawn and pale, his eyes hollowed. He still clutched his Winchester, as if the cold steel offered some comfort, some illusion of control. He didn't meet my gaze when he said he'd come, just nodded, a slight tremor running through his frame. He was broken, but he was still there, a testament to a kind of stubborn, desperate courage. Young Joshua Reed, bless his earnest heart, was by my side, his pistol holstered but his hand never far from it. He was scared. Anyone could see that. His stutter was back, a nervous habit, but his eyes, though wide with apprehension, also held a fierce determination. He was new to this world, new to its horrors, but he wasn't going to back down. Not yet. A dozen men, farmers and shopkeepers mostly, assembled at the edge of town, their faces grim, their rifles loaded. The late afternoon sun cast long, weary shadows across the fields, making the distant mine entrance look like a jagged wound in the earth. The air, usually so fresh and clean this time of year, was already heavy with the foul, metallic tang of sulfur. It clung to our clothes, coated our tongues, a promise of what lay ahead. "We go slow," I said, my voice steady, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We stick together, and we remember what Ilara said, lead won't work. This isn't about killing it. It's about seeing what we're up against, about understanding." A few murmurs, a few nods. No one looked convinced, but no one argued either. They just wanted an end to it, one way or another. The walk to the mine was silent, save for the crunch of our boots on the dry earth and the occasional nervous cough. The prairie wind, usually a companion, seemed to hold its breath, rustling through the dry cornstalks with an almost watchful quality. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, deeper, as if hiding something. When we reached the mine, the silence grew heavier, more oppressive. The entrance was a black maw, a jagged hole in the side of a low hill, framed by crumbling timbers that looked like the skeletal remains of some ancient beast. The air here was noticeably colder, damp with the breath of the earth, and the sulphurous stench was no longer a hint, but an overwhelming, stomach-churning assault. It permeated everything, a thick, vile blanket that made breathing difficult. "It's in there, O.V.," White muttered, his voice barely audible, his eyes fixed on the darkness. He was trembling openly now, his rifle held tight against his chest. I felt it, that smell. I nodded, gripping my shotgun tighter. We lit our lanterns, the small circles of yellow light doing little to push back the encroaching blackness. It felt like we were walking into the belly of something immense and ancient. "We go slow," I repeated, more to myself than to the men, one step at a time. Young Joshua swallowed hard, his eyes wide, fixed on the black maw of the shaft. He clutched his pistol. What if it's waiting?" "It knows you're here," I remembered Ilara's words. "It knew you were coming. It doesn't wait by chance." The first few yards of the shaft were relatively easy, the path worn smooth by generations of miners. But the air grew heavier, colder. The light from our lanterns swallowed almost immediately by the absolute dark. The walls dripped with cold moisture, reflecting our feeble light in slick, unsettling patches. Every sound seemed amplified. The drip of water, the scuff of a boot, the ragged breaths of the men. It was a suffocating, claustrophobic world, far removed from the wide-open skies of Iowa. Deeper we went, the path growing narrower, more treacherous. The timbers groaned under the weight of the earth, settling with unnerving creaks that echoed like whispers. We saw signs, not of human activity, but of something else. Scrapes on the rock walls, too high for a man, too deep for any animal I knew. A strange, oily residue clinging to damp stone, shimmering faintly in the lantern light, and the smell, the sulfur, grew so potent it burned our eyes and throats, making us cough and gag. Then we heard it, a low, guttural sound, not quite a growl, not quite a moan. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the very rock beneath our feet, a sound that spoke of immense size, of ancient slumber disturbed. Panic was a live thing, a beast in itself, trying to claw its way up our throats. I felt it, a cold knot in my gut, but I pushed it down. I had to. The men were looking to me. "Keep moving," I rasped, my voice hoarse from the sulfur. "Stay alert." Joshua, right behind me, stumbled, catching himself on the damp wall. "Elias," he whispered, his voice trembling. I feel it, like something's watching us." He was right. The darkness ahead felt less like an absence of light and more like a presence, a watchful, patient entity. It was an intelligence I felt, a cold, predatory awareness that had known we were coming. We rounded a bend in the shaft, and there it was. Not the creature itself, not yet, but the light. A soft, pulsing glow emanating from a deeper cavern ahead. Not the searing white of the horn we'd seen on Main Street, but a dimmer, more pervasive luminescence, casting the cavern walls in an unearthly, sickly green. We froze, all of us, rifles raised, lanterns trembling in our hands. The air thrummed with the low, guttural sound, stronger now, almost a purr of anticipation. Then, from the depths of that glowing cavern, they emerged. Not one, asterisk, two, asterisk, two colossal, winged entities, their forms slowly resolving out of the green-tinged gloom. They were even larger than I had imagined, even after seeing one in the night sky. 7 feet tall, perhaps more, their bat-like wings folded back, casting immense, shifting shadows on the cavern walls. And on each of their monstrous heads, a horn, thick and luminous, pulsed with a blinding, otherworldly light. It wasn't just a beacon. It was a living part of them, a source of their impossible power. The light from their horns, a brilliant, almost painful white, pierced the darkness of the mineshaft, cutting through the earth itself. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this light would be visible from miles above ground, a silent, terrifying signal. One of them, the one closer to us, unfurled its wings slightly, a leathery rustle that echoed like 1,000 ancient parchments tearing, its head tilted, and its eyes, black and fathomless, fixed on us. Not with animalistic hunger, not with mindless rage, no, with something far worse. It was an intelligence, an ancient, profound awareness that looked into us, past our rifles, past our fear, and saw something small, something utterly insignificant. And on its inhuman features, a subtle shift, a tightening of the reptilian mouth, almost a smile, a wrong smile, a knowing smile, as if it found our pathetic intrusion amusing, as if it had been expecting us. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ilara's words, always two. The things that slept for ages, the watchers from below. They weren't just here. They were times waiting. Asterisk. That was enough. More than enough. The bravest among us felt their resolve shatter. The sight of not one, but times two. Times of these impossible beings. Their casual, ancient intelligence. Their invulnerability made sickeningly clear by that knowing gaze. It was too much. A whimper escaped someone's lips, then a choked cry, and then, O.V. White. The man who had faced one of them with 5 shots, his defiance now utterly broken. He let out a scream, a raw, primal sound of pure terror that echoed through the mineshaft, a desperate, animalistic shriek. He dropped his rifle, his hands flying up to cover his face, his body convulsing in a paroxysm of pure, unadulterated fear. He scrambled backward, falling over himself, his screams continuing, rising in pitch, a sound that would haunt my sleep for decades to come. "Run!" I yelled, my own voice surprisingly steady amidst the chaos, but tinged with a desperation I couldn't hide. "Get out! All of you! Run!" There was no thought of fighting, no thought of standing our ground, just a desperate, blind scramble for the surface, for the open air, for anything that wasn't that suffocating, sulfur-laden darkness and those twin, intelligent gazes. We stumbled over each other, our lanterns swinging wildly, casting chaotic shadows that seemed to dance with the creatures behind us. O.V. White's screams were still ringing in the air, a constant, horrifying counterpoint to our frantic escape. He was a broken man, irrevocably scarred, his mind shattered by the impossible truth. Young Joshua, pale and trembling, kept pace with me, his eyes wide with a terror I knew he would never forget. He didn't stutter now, only gasped for breath, his youthful innocence stripped away in that terrible, echoing cavern. We burst out of the mine entrance, gasping, coughing, scrambling onto the prairie grass, our lungs burning from the sulfur and the exertion. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting sight, felt alien, too bright, too normal. We kept running, not stopping until the mine was a distant, dark smudge against the horizon, until the pervasive stench of sulfur began to dissipate, replaced by the crisp, clean autumn air. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We knew what was there. We returned to town, not as triumphant hunters, but as defeated, psychologically shattered men. Our faces were streaked with dirt and fear, our eyes haunted, our bodies trembling. We carried no trophies, no proof, only a secret far darker and more terrifying than any individual encounter on Main Street. The knowledge that we were not alone, that something ancient and intelligent lurked beneath our feet, 2 of them, watching, waiting, and we had nothing, absolutely nothing, with which to fight them. The town, already under siege, was now utterly, terrifyingly helpless. The creatures were gone, just like that. The very next morning, the mine stood silent, its maw a black scar against the prairie. The air, though still carrying a faint, lingering tang of sulfur, was clear enough to breathe without burning. No more blinding lights, no more tearing canvas sounds, no more frantic barks from dogs. They had vanished as mysteriously as they appeared, leaving behind only the profound, exhausted shock of a town that had peered into the abyss and seen something ancient staring back. Van Meter tried to go back to normal. We had to. The harvest wouldn't wait. The crops still needed to be brought in. The general store still needed to sell its goods. The bank still needed to keep its ledgers, but nothing was normal. The quiet hum of daily life was now overlaid with a new, deeper silence. People moved differently, spoke in hushed tones, glanced nervously at the darkening sky as evening approached. Every shadow held a potential terror. Every rustle in the cornfields could be a returning wingbeat. We had survived, but survival had come at a cost. Oh, White was proof of that cost. He never truly recovered. The screams he let out in that mine, they were the last truly loud sounds he made for years. He returned to his dry goods store, a shadow of his former self. His hearty laugh was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his eye. He'd jump at sudden noises, stare blankly into space, and sometimes, late at night, I heard tell, he'd sit in his store, just staring at the empty street, muttering to himself about bullets and leathery hides. His wife said he never slept without the lamps burning. He was a man utterly broken by the futility of his defiance, by the realization that some things simply cannot be shot away. Young Joshua, too, was changed. The eager ambition in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, watchful solemnity. He still carried himself with diligence, still did his duties as deputy, but the youthful excitement was gone. He rarely spoke of the mine or of the creatures, but sometimes, when the wind was just right, carrying the scent of damp earth, I'd see him shiver, his gaze distant, lost in the echoing darkness. He had seen the world's deeper, darker truths, and they had left an indelible mark on his spirit, reshaping his view of what was truly possible and what was terrifyingly real. As for me, I worked to hold things together. It was my duty. I walked the streets, spoke calming words, assured people the danger was past. But inside, the memory of that knowing gaze, that wrong smile, burned like a brand. I helped file the reports, of course, to the county sheriff, to the state authorities. They came, these men from outside, with their official notebooks and their skeptical eyes. They listened, they nodded, they asked their questions. They talked about mass hysteria, about strange lights from swamp gas, about foxes in the mine. We let them talk. We, the people of Van Meter, had a shared secret, a truth too bizarre to tell, too real to ever truly forget. We met their dismissals with a quiet, knowing silence. We knew what we had seen, we knew what had happened, and we knew that no official explanation, no logical dismissal, could ever erase the sight of those two luminous horns in the dark, or the pervasive stench of sulfur that still clung to our clothes, our homes, our very memories. The truth was buried, not by us, but by the layers of disbelief and official suppression that the world outside imposed. But in Van Meter, it was never forgotten, not truly. I'm an old man now. The years have piled up, one on top of the other, like dry leaves in an autumn wind. My hands still shake sometimes, not just from age, but with the memory of those trembling lanterns in the mine. My back aches, but it's not just the dusty roads of Van Meter. It's the weight of that secret, carried for decades. Most of the others are gone now. White passed years ago, still haunted, still muttering. Joshua, he moved away, sought a quieter life, I heard. Elara Finch, she's long since joined the earth she understood so well. But I remember, clearly, every detail, every smell, every terrifying sound. People forget, you see. New generations grow up, full of their own certainties, their own progress. They build new roads, new houses, forget the old stories, dismiss them as quaint superstitions. They look at Van Meter, a quiet farming town, and see nothing but fields of corn and an honest day's work. They don't know what sleeps beneath their feet. They don't know what waits in the forgotten corners of the world, in the abandoned shafts, in the deep places where sunlight never touches. But the things we saw, those colossal, winged entities with their luminous horns and their ancient, intelligent eyes, they still exist. I know it with a chilling certainty. They are patient, inhumanly patient. They are ancient, perhaps older than the land itself, older than the concept of time we understand. They are not bound by our rules, our science, our understanding. They are simply there, waiting for cycles to turn, for the world to forget enough to become vulnerable again. I've seen the cycle before. Someone digs too deep, explores too far, pushes too hard against the thin veil of what we call reality. They disturb something that should remain undisturbed. They awaken something that should sleep forever. And then, for a brief, terrifying moment, the world is reminded of its own smallness, its own fragility. My story, this quiet elegy for the victims past and future, it's just a small chapter, a whisper passed down through the generations, often dismissed, sometimes believed, always chilling. I've told it as best I can, as truthfully as I remember, but I know it's futile. My warning, like Alera's old tales, will be swept aside by the relentless march of progress, by human ambition, by the arrogance of those who believe they have tamed every corner of the earth. They will come again, new, unsuspecting souls, drawn by curiosity, by greed, by the simple need to build or explore. They will come back to the forgotten mines, to the dark places, to the very spot where we stood, trembling before those twin lights. And they will find that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only survived, and that some things, some ancient, intelligent malevolence, never truly vanish. They just wait. They wait. And the world continues to turn, oblivious, until the horn light sweeps across Main Street once more, and the sulfur rises from the earth, and the whispers begin anew. But that, as they say, is another story. And I, Elias Thorne, will not be here to tell it.